A few years ago, popular D&D tuber XP to Level 3 released a series of videos lovingly describing the Lord of the Rings movies as a big D&D campaign filled with jokes as well as insights into what it's really like to play the popular fantasy role-playing game. These videos are well-produced, hilarious, and effortlessly entertaining. This video is not that. We're going to take a cold, hard, technical look at something behind all the memes and dice rolls, the time management of each adventuring session from the perspective of someone who's been running multiple games a week since 5e's release, including 4 years of professional experience. How long does it actually take to establish a setting, introduce a group of 4 low-level halflings, set out on a hex crawl, and engage in dozens of combat encounters at your kitchen table, local game store, or virtual tabletop? How many sessions will it take to get through the extended editions of the films? How many licks does it take to get to the center of Mount Doom? Also, if you've never played a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons before, welcome! I'm going to teach you some stuff about what that looks like, and if you've never watched the Lord of the Rings movies before, this is going to make no sense. Go watch the movies before you watch this. Okay, on with the video! Our films begin with a lengthy narration setting the stage for Middle-earth, our Dark Lord Sauron, and the One Ring. This is all a prologue before our actual story takes place, and in D&D terms, this is our Session 0, where the Dungeon Master introduces the setting and the players make their characters. There are many ways to run a Session 0, one of which is to send out a group text or online communication and have everyone make their characters as homework. While several events in the movies indeed fall into the category of this could have been an email, that's still time dedicated to the game, and I'm working with the condition that what we see on screen is the game that took place, sort of like reverse engineering the Vox Machina animated series into the actual play sessions we see in Critical Role. One of the big things that happens in a Session 0 is that the Dungeon Master and the players agree on what rules they're going to follow, so let's you and me establish some rules for this video. Rule number 1 we just covered. If it's on screen, it's at the table. Rule number 2, we're playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Are there other role-playing games you could be playing that might be better suited for this scenario? Absolutely, and I'd like to give a blind recommendation to check out Free League's The One Ring. Some games have quicker combat but spend more time on social scenarios and vice versa. It all more or less averages out, and for better or worse, 5e is what more people are playing, especially for their first campaign, so it's the best frame of reference for our little thought experiment. Rule number 3, sessions will last 3.5 hours. That's 180 minutes of game time plus 30 minutes of everyone arriving late, getting snacks, and talking about life and stuff. This is an important part of the role-playing experience we should account for, so we're setting aside that 30 minutes and concerning ourselves with the remaining 3 hours that involve our characters and dice. Some real sessions take less time, many take more. This is a happy medium. Rule number 4, time spent in session is based on reality, not expectations, and there's some irony here since this is indeed a theory video and not a fully run experiment, so it really is expectations, but these are well-tempered and measured expectations based on my running well over 1,000 D&D sessions and quite often accomplishing less in the actual session than I initially planned. So, after my first ballpark estimate of how many sessions The Lord of the Rings would take, and my second estimate made while watching the films for at least the 20th time and taking notes, I made a third pass extending times based on how long this stuff would actually take to play out. Rule number 5, this is about time management within a session. It's not about the macro level time management of scheduling or even DM prep. It's not about more gamey aspects like encounter balance, character builds, and dungeon design. It's just about how much time we're spending at the table. That might mean a few necessary asides to cover how other aspects of the game will affect your time spent at the table, but I'll keep those to a minimum to better manage the timestamp of this video. With all that lengthy narration out of the way, we'll be sending our 5 players into the thick of it with high-leveled human and elf characters to get them invested in the lore while also teaching them some mechanics before throwing a blank character sheet at them. After playing out the prologue, they all make their hobbits, except for one experienced player who really sells the Dungeon Master on the idea of being a wizard. The actual prologue and combat will take 60 minutes, while character creation will take 120 minutes, giving us our first 3-hour session. Session 2 is concerning hobbits. The Dungeon Master describes the present day in the Shire, and the players take turns introducing their characters, Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, and Gandalf, as they attend the birthday party of our NPC Bilbo, who is going to drop the magic item MacGuffin of the ring and start our tale. Gandalf is going to have some solo time investigating the ring. This would take a ton of time to travel around and make history and investigation rolls on if we were with the party, but because this is happening between one player and the DM, just like the montage in the movie, this is going to go by rather quickly. Let's say 30 minutes for player 5, plus 15 minutes for the DM to chew their own scenery describing the Black Riders, which is a weird aside, but we'll get to that. Then we go back to the Shire to get the other 4 players together, who set off on their path to Rivendell while Gandalf goes to find Saruman. The 4 hobbits traveling together will take 105 minutes, quickly hopping from different locales and making skill checks to hide from a Nazgul and then jump on a boat. The last 30 minutes is going to take us back to Gandalf, who is going to have a little wizard duel when negotiations with Saruman go south. So, during that last session, we had an hour of the DM interacting with only one player while the other 4 watched. This, once again, falls into the category of could have been on Discord, but we're counting it as table time because either way it still contributes to the overall playtime. I don't think that single character cutaways like this are all that uncommon anymore, especially considering that D&D has become a form of passive entertainment for many players and fans. It's not too much of a stretch to expect 4 players to witness another story, so long as the player and the DM make it entertaining, which does add its own extra pressure. It also breaks one of the fundamental rules of group gaming: don't split the party. There's a discussion to be had about the efficacy of that rule in practice, but for right now, I want you to ignore nuance and instead take a drink every time the Fellowship splits the party. Session 4, the hobbits are spending an entire session in Bree. Yes, all they really do here is go to a tavern, but players love to spend time in a tavern. Plus there's a new player character to introduce with Aragorn, who is actually Sam's player 2. All of our players, except for one we'll get to, are going to play multiple characters to deal with our large cast, because having 9 or more players is crazy to manage, although you could alternatively accomplish this with multiple parties of different players like what Season 4 of Critical Role is doing. But this is the solution I came up with, and we're focused on time management, and I'm allotting 1 full session to tavern time at the Prancing Pony. The party sets off on a hex crawl, now with the aid of Aragorn. Hex crawls take a long time, that's why they're called crawls, and while there are other ways of establishing travel time in your game, and most of them are quicker than hex crawls, given how our cast of players likes to stop in a bog and talk about second breakfasts, I think the hex crawl model is most fitting. So in 30 minutes, we're only going to move 1 hex to get to Weathertop, which is going to take the next 2 hours of game time, as this is the party's first real combat with their own characters. Combat scenes involving a full party and multiple enemies, which take only a minute or 2 of screen time in the movie, are going to take very much longer in D&D. If we take the rules very literally in this regard, a single round of combat represents 6 seconds of action. So using this model for a minute of screen time equals 10 rounds of game time, with each round consisting of a turn for every character, and each of those turns taking anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes depending on how complicated someone's character sheet is, how proficient they are at actually playing the game, and how quickly they can actually make up their damn mind and roll the dice. You can start to see why this shit would take 2 hours, but it is going to improve the more we play. The last 30 minutes is returning to our hex crawl, where we find Bilbo's trolls, nice callback to the exposition dump in Session 2, and we establish that simple ranger healing spells can't cure the curse on Frodo. We welcome a new player at the table who really wants to play a hot elf babe, so we all help them speedrun their character build in 30 minutes. We introduce Arwen as Aragorn's girlfriend and Frodo's saving grace. That takes another 30 minutes, and then we have a chase sequence, ending in a Deus Ex Machina spell, which takes 30 minutes because the Dungeon Master really wants to get everyone together in Rivendell, which is the same exact reason why we're saving Gandalf from the top of Isengard with eagles, which actually only takes about 15 minutes. We establish that the whole gang is together in Rivendell. Bilbo the NPC is here too, and there's 75 minutes of everyone making their alternate characters Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir. Character creation goes much quicker this time because everyone knows the rules and they already made their gimmick Hobbit characters, so now they want to make some optimized combat powerhouses. The Council of Elrond is going to be its own fantastic fantasy session, fully establishing the different factions at play and all the lore and all the reasons for taking this ring. This is also a meta session for laying the groundwork for what the rest of the campaign will be now that the introductory adventure of getting to Rivendell is out of the way. By the way, Player 6 couldn't make it and decided they didn't really like combat and chase sequences all that much, but they really like being an elf and having romantic roleplay with Player 2, so she'll be back in every now and then for those scenes and those scenes only. The DM is going to spend 15 minutes on a cutaway to establish that Saruman is a villain and he is getting dark magic and Uruk-hai together to track down the party. Having a non-diegetic scrying of the villain like this is pretty unconventional, but I actually like it and I should try it more often. While it does ask the players to compartmentalize this knowledge of the villain in their player brain and not their character brain, it goes a long way to frame some stakes for the story. With the party and the quest established, we set off on another hex crawl. We have some inter-party banter, which is fun because everyone's swapping around between two characters. And then we have a minor encounter where some evil crows fly overhead and everyone rolls for stealth. I like stuff like this. Not every encounter has to result in combat. The next set of hexes lead to the snowy mountains of Caradhras, where we have an environmental encounter, which would call for turn order even though we're not in combat, so add 60 minutes, and the party decides to backtrack and go through the mines of Moria instead, which means we have our first true dungeon in our Dungeons & Dragons game. We quickly hexcrawl over to the Gates of Moria, a simple puzzle which takes way too long, a time-honored D&D tradition, so there goes 30 minutes. Add in a weird tentacle monster fight, and there's another hour before we actually get in the dungeon, and now we're in a dungeon crawl for the next 90 minutes. I like the implication that we're letting Player 4 describe some of the lore and scenery here. Good practice that takes some pressure off the DM's shoulders and gets the players involved. By the end of this session, we arrive at Balin's tomb. Balin's tomb is a whole session to itself. There's a nice map with verticality and a good setup, the heroes establish defenses and face waves of enemies including our first boss monster, the cave troll, and then they start to run away. Some of my favorite sessions are the ones that only take place in one small setting, kind of like a bottle episode of a TV show. From there, we don't dungeon crawl, but rather engage in a dungeon chase, which will take up an hour interspersed with the occasional attack roll and skill check. The Balrog fight isn't really a fight, I don't think we're even rolling initiative here, but between the Dungeon Master describing the threat, the players assessing and fleeing from the threat, and Gandalf's big spell and big fall, that's going to take an hour. Then the party spends the last hour recovering from their first player character death, taking a short rest, and deciding where to go next. We go to Lothlorien, immediately fail a stealth check, but spend a whole session of downtime in another elf city before stocking up on magic items and moving on to boats. The boats are going to make hex crawling much quicker, which is good because once we arrive at Amon Hen, we're getting hit with one 60-minute combat encounter with everyone split up, a 30-minute PvP between Boromir and Frodo, another 30-minute combat with Boromir coming back to help Merry and Pippin, and finally a 30-minute solo boss fight with Aragorn. Okay, so earlier I mentioned how much time a single combat scene takes to play out, and here I am expecting 4 separate encounters in less than 3 hours. How is that possible? Well, 2 of these encounters are duels between only 2 characters. This creates a simple back and forth forth with combat rolls rather than the chaos of the party trying to strategize while the DM manages multiple monsters. Duels are typically pretty quick by comparison. But the other two encounters involve the Uruk-hai, which the DM has hyped up to be more dangerous than the average orc or goblin. This might resemble the 2014 Orog, a CR2 monster with 18 AC and an average of 42 HP, meaning it should take multiple hits from low to mid-level PCs to take down. And yet, in the movies, we see Aragorn, Gimli, and especially Legolas regularly take down these threatening foes in a single attack roll. This is an easy time management trick if you want quicker combats while providing an amped up power fantasy. 4th edition minions. Our Uruk-hai still have the same offensive power and AC, but they all have only 1 HP and provide far less experience per kill. You can't use this trick all the time, and that's why we're keeping Lurtz up at full HP, but keep the minion option in mind when you want to have your big battle cake and eat it quickly too. Session 14 is mostly a meta session, kind of a Session 0 rehash. 2 characters are dead, 2 characters are captured, and Frodo wants to go it alone to reduce the chance of PvP from the cursed magic item he's carrying. Boromir's player makes a new character, Gollum, because that little detail from XP to level 3 videos is just too damn funny for me to not steal and reuse. The Dungeon Master should touch base with everyone to make sure they're having a grand time, and everyone says it's great and they're looking forward to less hex crawls and more real battles. I love these check-in sessions every now and then. Session 15, we go back to Gandalf and his duel with the Balrog. Duels don't take too long, but framing them does. Let's say this takes 30 minutes while everyone else grabs their character sheets and gets ready. Then we're spending 2 hours on a rocky hex crawl with Sam, Frodo, and our new player character, Gollum. This session does include a PvP combat, which extends out some time, plus some skill checks with climbing and elven rope. We close on 30 minutes of Merry and Pippin being taken to Isengard and leaving behind some clues for their own other characters. Which is where we pick up next time with Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas, aka the Gals. Get it? Hex crawling for an hour while making survival checks to find out they're taking the hobbits to Isengard. We do a 15-minute villain vignette to show that Saruman has big bad evil plans, then spend 45 minutes showing off the effect of those evil plans on a new NPC Éomer and a new PC Éowyn. Then an hour passes with Merry and Pippin listening to the DM argue with their own orcs until all the orcs are attacked by Éomer, an NPC, and a chase ensues until the Deus Ex Machina Ent shows up to save them. Back with Team Gals, we have a really cool social encounter with Éomer and his boys, leading to the pile of bodies scene. Did you know that Aragorn's player actually broke his toe when he stepped on a D4 here? Anyway, this whole sequence would take an hour of game time. It's been a while since we checked in on Team Samfro, so we're going to give them 2 hours of hex crawling and horror roleplay in the Dead Marshes. And we'll keep up this pattern, checking back in with the Gals as they think they're fighting Saruman, but surprise, it's Gandalf coming back to the party. This will take a good hour. Then we go back with Sam, Frodo, and Gollum, who spend over an hour planning how they'll get into the Black Gate before failing to execute any plan and succeeding on a low DC stealth check before making a plan B. I know this seems excessive, but some of the longest sessions I've managed have been the ones where players have to do a thing without an NPC explicitly telling them the course of action. Sometimes this works out great, and the players show off their clever role-playing and problem-solving creativity. And other times you spend 2 hours and go nowhere. For session 19, we are spending one single 3-hour session on Merry and Pippin getting eaten by a tree, going to find the Ents, listening to the Entmoot, and eventually convincing Treebeard to enact the March of the Ents. Again, this may seem excessive, but having just ran a big adventure around a political situation that took much longer than expected, I think the 15 minutes of screen time taking around 3 hours of play is warranted here. Session 20 is a good one. Gandalf and the gals go to Edoras. There's a lot of social roleplay and intrigue, making for a sort of social puzzle with how Theoden is charmed. We even get a little bit of non-lethal combat, and then hatch an idea to ride out to Helm's Deep. Just a solid single session, and worth staying on one map for the whole time. Let's talk about maps for a second. Maps are great. I love maps. They help bridge the gap between reality and the shared imagination, and they are a central set piece for establishing our scenes and encounters. Making maps takes time and resources, so naturally you want to milk it for all it's worth when you have a good one. And that applies whether you're looking at something you've drawn out, you've made elaborate 3D terrain, you have a virtual map on something like Roll20, or even a vividly described theater of the mind stage that still takes time. And any of these, whatever your preference is, you're faced with the challenge in this campaign of transitioning between these parties, which means regularly swapping maps. If we were always using elaborate set pieces, this could take 10 minutes of potential game time for every swap. We don't want that. We want the most time possible spent in character and rolling dice. So I've tried to alleviate this challenge by having a single primary map in most sessions, while those secondary maps can be better established through quick theater of the mind descriptions or mini-maps, drastically reducing transition time so we can get back to the adventure. Session 21, we give 15 minutes to the DM to remind us that Saruman is bad news, then resolve things in Edoras with some logistical planning, downtime spent tallying up how many civilians and fighters and horses and supplies we have. This might be my least favorite thing to do at the table since it feels like a group project in accounting, but sometimes you gotta do it and it's going to take 45 minutes here. The last 2 hours are dedicated to seeing Samfro doing a hex crawl, talking about potatoes, hiding from Oliphants, and meeting Faramir, a new player character. Session 22 is all about the gals, as Gandalf takes a break and says his character wants to find that cool Éomer NPC and bring his horse boys to join our war assets. We spend 30 minutes hex crawling while making jokes about soup and dwarf women, and then Arwen is here this week, so we spend 30 minutes talking about her being tragic and hot. Then we have a huge combat with wargs versus riders, which shouldn't take too long at this point, but is going to take a long time because this is the first time we've really engaged with mounted combat rules, so that's a new mechanic for everyone to get a feel for. Aragorn doesn't get a feel for it, falls to a death, which is very sad for Arwen's player, but we'll figure something out next week. Session 23 is when we break out our big Helm's Deep map. We spend the first hour showing off this map to everyone and answering their questions about all the different parts and how to defend them. Then 15 minutes to let the DM do a not-so-subtle Nazi speech at his Warhammer Orc army, 15 minutes to establish that Aragorn is actually alive and also very hot, 30 minutes to welcome some elves, remember that one elf NPC, and then a final 60 minutes of accounting and placing down minis to get ready for the actual fighting. This is the kind of session where I would hope to actually roll initiative by the end, but it wouldn't happen, and that's what I mean for trying to adjust for reality rather than expectations. The next session will stay at Helm's Deep with 2 different combat initiative sections. First, the initial volleys and ladders, then the big breach sequence. Awesome session with a ton of good combat design to learn from, but we're moving on. The final entry in our Helm's Deep trilogy of sessions will start with 60 minutes of the fun little bridge sequence and having to pull back, then 30 minutes of realizing things are fucked, then 60 minutes of rolling initiative and charging anyway, then a final 30 minutes where we reveal that Gandalf's player has been listening in from the bedroom the whole time and is here with his newly painted Age of Sigmar collection to save the day. And we're not done with huge set pieces because it's time for Merry and Pippin to invade Isengard with their tree army. This will take a whole session. Session 27 goes back to Sam, Frodo, Gollum, and Faramir. We spend an hour at this waterfall dungeon place before going to Osgiliath for 2 hours and getting attacked by Nazgul on Felvis, meaning our first and kind of only session with both dungeons and dragons. And session 28 will be a big victory lap, touching base with our 3 parties for an hour each while tallying loot, taking a long rest, leveling up, and assessing where each party is heading to next. Not a lot is happening here, but sometimes a good downtime session is a nice refresher, especially with big things to come. And the big thing to come is our final adventure book, The Return of the King. Session 29, we start with a 15-minute flashback for Gollum. These are nice to do every now and then to bring up somebody's backstory, and in this case, it goes back to our main quest with the One Ring, so it's good to highlight even if it's entirely scripted and not really interactive. We segue that into 30 minutes of hex crawling and bantering with Gollum, Sam, and Frodo. We spend 75 minutes bringing Gandalf and the gals to Isengard, where it looks like we might reunite with a bigger party for a while and have a boss fight against Saruman, but that turns into more of a social encounter. Then we spend the last hour in Edoras basically having a tavern session. Session 30 is going to be a slow one, starting out with an hour of aimless hex crawling from Team Samfro with Gollum Slayer role-playing with himself. Then 90 minutes for Pippin's player to sleight of hand the Palantir, making everyone's situation worse and inciting some metagame discussion on what to do next that winds up once again splitting the party the DM had just tried so hard to bring back together nicely. Also, Arwen is here this week, so we make sure we spend 30 minutes on her and let her make some proxy rolls for the Forge Master NPC, making her roleplay boyfriend's magic sword. The DM has had big plans for Minas Tirith for a while, and it's time to unveil another big map and a complicated noble NPC, so we're going to spend 2 hours establishing Gandalf and Pippin's place there. Follow that up with an hour of Sam, Frodo, and Gollum reaching the stairs and once again succeeding on low DC stealth rolls. Session 32 is going to be ambitious with a lot of moving parts, but at this point I think we can pull it off. We're going to give Faramir 60 minutes to have a little fight at the River of Osgiliath, which seems greedy, so we're going to hand temporary characters to our other players so that everybody is involved. Then give 30 minutes to Pippin and Gandalf enacting this quick plan to light the beacons, which transitions nicely to the gals getting 30 minutes to answer the call to action. The final 60 minutes will unite Faramir with Gandalf and Pippin while we see if the temporary character everyone else was playing survived. Really great session here. Might use this setup somehow in the future myself. We're going to keep the Minas Tirith momentum going with a social and strategy hour to deal with the incoming invasion. Then 60 minutes of Team Samfro climbing the stairs and having PvP. Party split, take a shot. The last hour will be Faramir riding out to certain doom, which, just like in the movie, would take a ton of time to set up and say, "Are you sure this is what you're doing?" before the DM just drops 100 d6 on the table and ends the heroic charge. We need to check back in with the mustering of the Rohirrim. The movie spends quite a bit of time here, and there's actually several distinct scenes checking in on every PC and major NPC in this camp, so this whole set piece is going to take a full 3-hour session. Even though it might seem like we're not getting a lot done this time, the arcs of your adventure aren't just determined by your combat encounters. Aragorn getting his sword and accepting his role, Merry accepting his role within Rohan, Éomer and Éowyn talking about who gets to fight. These are all crucial moments of character development that are guided by personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, which should absolutely have dedicated table time in your treasure quest and save the world narratives. Big fights are cool, but this would be one of my favorite sessions, kind of like Lothlorien, as a player or as a DM. Session 35 is going to stick with the gals, exploring a one-session dungeon complete with exploration, traps, horror, social roleplay with the threat of combat, and successful implementation of lore and magic items. Some of my best dungeons were the ones that were easy to complete in one session, and I think this would be a fun and memorable session for everyone involved. Then it's time to go back to Minas Tirith, where the DM is bringing out a bunch of toys. Even if this is all theater of the mind, this is going to take a lot of time to describe, and we're likely using some sort of mass combat model to deal with all of these NPCs. This highlights a flaw in a battle like Minas Tirith versus a battle like Helm's Deep, when you're recreating something like them in D&D. Helm's Deep was a big deal, yes, but it's one of the best battles in film history because the action is all framed around the core cast of characters, and that translates well to D&D, where the focus should be on your players and their characters, and how that shifts the world around them. Meanwhile, Minas Tirith is certainly a bigger spectacle, but for many people it's not as engaging because even though Gandalf is shouting orders, all of the action is happening to nameless mooks on either side. Now, this could be a lot of fun for one D&D session, but if this is the kind of tabletop gaming you're looking for, you should really try a war game. Anyway, this shit is cool, but it's going to take 3 hours, split roughly into 6 different 30-minute sections. Introduction, trebuchets, Nazgul, siege towers, battlements, Grand. Session 37 is going to cut away from our big battle because last time was just too much, and we have 3 more parties to touch base with. The first is the Gals, who have this little interaction at the river, which is not really a combat or even a social encounter so much as it is just pure aura farming, 15 minutes tops. Then we have another 1-session dungeon with Frodo and Gollum versus Shelob, which turns into Frodo versus Gollum and Shelob, which turns into Sam versus Gollum and Shelob, and somehow Gollum still loses. This is going to take 150 minutes, leaving us only a quick 15 minutes of rushing at the end of the session to establish that Eowyn and Merry are on the way to Minas Tirith, foreshadowing for the next session. Session 38 returns to our mass combat for a 90-minute section of the walls being breached, armored trolls breaking through the human line, and the orcs pillaging the city. We give Pippin and Gandalf a chance to save the all is lost moment, which only gets more all is lost when they fail their boss battle with the Witch King in 30 minutes. Then, the last 60 minutes is the Rohirrim arriving, the Charge of Death, most epic moment in film history, and pretty damn cool at the game table too. End of session, but not the end of Minas Tirith time. Session 39, we decided not to kill off Faramir, so his fate is going to be in the hands of Pippin and Gandalf. The pyre rescue sequence would actually be a really cool setup for a D&D encounter because it involves personal stakes in an initiative order sequence that involves skill checks and social roles more so than traditional combat, and still ends in the funny death of a hated NPC. Also, it would take an hour. Then we cut back to the Rohirrim, represented by players Eowyn and Merry, in 3 separate sequences. The charge on the field taking 30 minutes, the Muma kill section taking 60 minutes, and finally a 30-minute boss fight with the Witch King. The Gals are back in town with their army of undead, here to aura farm and land crits in their own 2 hours of combat sequences, including a river, a dumb boss fight with Gothmog, and Legolas soloing a Muma kill. Then we wrap up the Battle of Pelennor Fields with an hour of aftermath saying goodbye to Theoden NPC, reluctantly letting go of the Oathbreakers because the DM made them too OP, saving Eowyn and the Houses of Healing, and reuniting Merry and Pippin. Session 41 is where we go back to Team Samfro, but it's really just Sam having to invade a tower on his own to save Frodo. So the DM throws him another Deus Ex Machina with another orc mini-civil war, but he does still have one combat sequence on his own before finding Frodo and strategizing a way out of here. This will all take 90 minutes, leaving our last 90 minutes to the rest of the gang in Minas Tirith, figuring out their diversion plan to bring their mass combat subsystem over to Sam and Frodo to hopefully defeat the big bad evil guy and end the campaign. Session 42 is our best D&D session, the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. We spend 30 minutes making funny stealth and deception checks with Sam and Frodo, while the orcs sing "There's a Wit, There's a Way." Then 60 minutes moving in the troops with Merry, Pippin, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and Gandalf. Look at all the player characters we finally have together, so that the DM can give a villainous speech with the NPC they just made, who Aragorn promptly murders to give his own epic speech. We leave that combat on a cliffhanger while we go to the cliffs of Sam and Frodo climbing and hiding, and Gollum is back and we're rolling initiative for PvP and doing a chase. Then we cut back to roll initiative with the rest of the gang for 2 rounds of combat against orcs until a troll shows up? You know what? I think a lot of movie fans know that this was originally going to be Sauron himself showing up to face off with Aragorn, but PJ and company decided that would be too on the nose and stole some of Sam and Frodo's thunder, so they swapped in a troll with the power of CGI. Thematically, a good move, it works for the movies, but for our Dungeons & Dragons finale? Subtlety can go to the 9 hells. We're using our epic Sauron mini in this fight again. Is it stupid? Yes, but sometimes a big, dumb boss fight is the smartest thing you can do. For our finale, with all of our big moments happening at once, we are actually going to use a single initiative tracker for our 2 parties on 2 different maps. This is bold, but I have done it multiple times and it's always cool, even if the first round is a little tricky to describe. Over the course of the next 3 hours in initiative order, the Gals and co. are losing their fight against Sauron and his orcs, and Frodo fails his wisdom save, but then the PvP between him and Gollum winds up with Gollum falling into the lava and destroying the ring. Big win, quest complete, explosion, strawberries and cream, Grandalf summons the eagles, yay! But there's one more session. The multiple endings of Return of the King are lovingly made fun of, but I think they perfectly match the vibe of going around the table and giving epilogues for all your characters. Arwen is back and completes her personal quest of marrying Aragorn. Aragorn gets to be king, Gimli and Legolas are together forever, Éowyn and Faramir also get married because why not? Frodo and Gandalf go gently into the plane of elves or whatever, and Sam, Merry, and Pippin live out happy lives in the Shire with all their treasures and experience. The end. We did it. That's our campaign. 44 sessions. A good year if you're able to play weekly with a few skip weeks and holidays, or more likely 2 years if you're on an irregular schedule or playing bi-weekly. If you're looking to plot out your own campaign, or you just wondered how time at the D&D table worked, then I hope this little thought experiment was insightful. But the biggest takeaway is that while I examined the films from the admittedly weird perspective of a completed tabletop role-playing adventure, the adventure you play out with your friends won't be nearly as scripted. Be mindful that hex crawls and turn order combat and even social scenes all take more time than you'd initially expect, but as long as everyone is having fun and the adventure is moving forward in a direction everyone thinks is neat, then that time is well spent. Set a goal for what you want your players to accomplish in a session, but don't stick to that goal so rigidly that they can't stray from the beaten path, because straying from the beaten path is just part of what adventuring is all about. In other words, just roll with it. Have a nat 20 day. Bye-bye.